Hello, Michael.
Hello, Joe.
Thank you for coming. This is a very casual conversation.
Yes.
We call this a fun chat. FUUUN, or we pronounce it fun, is the name of our mobile spaces. This particular one is a mobile tea house. And chat, CHJ bracket T, has both the word tea in Japanese and Chinese cha, and with English tea makes it a chat. So we'll be chatting casually over tea. I invite people to have this conversation, the people whom I have found to be extremely knowledgeable or intelligent or sensitive about a particular subject or generally in life. And I find that sometimes without planning, the conversations go so inspiring that I would like to be less selfish and record these conversations to share with other people who might find it somewhat inspiring, educational, or entertaining. Who knows what happens. But here is the stage, and I would like to have this very casual conversation with you over tea.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You're most welcome. To start, would you mind reintroducing yourself?
Okay. Well, my name's Mike Kato. I have a middle name, Konin. The characters imply one is kindness, especially pertaining to one's elders and ancestors, and the other character meaning person in a somewhat archaic kanji. And I think that first off, my name implies my origins. I was born and raised in the United States. Lived there until I was 24 after completing my formative education through university. But my roots are in Japan. Part of it is because of my academic experience, but I decided at 24 to explore the country of my ancestral heritage. And I've ended up being here 37 years. Mostly pursuing things that are related to my academic background, environmental science, and particularly having to do with mountains, forests, wood, and how they affect the well-being of human communities and especially cities.
So wood having such a powerful role to play in your professional life. Academically trained as an environmental scientist, how have you been? I mean, most people become consultants or professors. Can you share with us how have you used that knowledge in your own life?
Okay, wood. Wood obviously is something that all of us are familiar with. We see it in our homes. We see it in our desks at school. But for me, wood, first off, in the state of California, especially when I went to university in Northern California, it was while I was at UC Berkeley that really, albeit family trips I did before, but I was completely struck with fascination, admiration, combination of things with the giant sequoias, some of which precede the birth of Christ. The biggest known tree in the world is one of them, a big redwood. But there are trees that are not the biggest trees, but several that are so big that 2 lanes of traffic pass through the base of the tree. The tree grows up, the roots get somewhat exposed, and it's so big that 2 lanes, it's not just a one way and you wait for the cars to come through. They go through on both directions.
And there was a tunnel
Yeah.
carved out of a tree?
Yeah. It's not just one. There's several places where that happens, and so there are, I wouldn't say common trees, but it's enough that there's not just one spot in California where that's done. There's like 15, 20. These are huge trees, and we know from the tree rings that some of them that haven't been cut yet are more than 2,000 years old. So when I thought about how the tree lives, breathes, accumulates water, does what it does for thousands of years, what is the role of trees in our lives? Why do they exist this way? What do they do? How do they grow? How much do they grow? What do they do for the planet? Why is it that these...
The question that I didn't ask properly.
Sure.
So, with all your expertise in environmental science, in our previous conversation, you have really inspired me and amazed me by your knowledge about trees. So I really wanted to focus today's conversation around wood and trees because, well, so happens. I myself, when I was educated in the US, was fascinated by Japanese carpentry. I was an architecture student then. And so wood, Japanese, America, an unexpected common theme, maybe perhaps because tree is just about the most common theme across every culture in the world. But anyhow, today we'll spend some time taking tree as the convenient topic to weave through your very, very eventful and deeply experiential life. With that said, let's continue with the redwoods in the Northern California.
Okay, so the redwoods, there's many that are very, very old trees, and at the same time, my first taste of, I wouldn't call it the fame part of it, but just impact was in 4th grade. Our family had a compost pile in the backyard. I realized through putting things in the compost and moving things around that it was obvious that methane gas was produced in the compost process, and I would know that because I would douse the compost pile completely in water, and once it's thoroughly wet and like puddles are on top, then I would light the gas, and for an instant it would glow blue and then go out. So I studied what was happening in there, and for a summer poster session, the process of composting was the subject of my poster session in elementary school, 4th grade. And in 4th grade and 6th grade, Tamagawa, another guy, the two of us were featured in the Metro section of the Los Angeles Times. The LA Times knew that our school was doing these kinds of poster session activities, and they saw the 2 posters. I don't even remember Tom's. He was 2 years above me. What his was about, but we were interviewed, and I was just like, yeah, this is what I want to keep doing. So composting and how good soil, nutritious, good, healthy soil production and the relationship with trees was the initial passion was lit in 4th grade, and I went on to do lots of things. 14, 15 years as a Boy Scout leader, done a lot of mountaineering activities, but really all of those things in terms of academic background, it comes from seeing how soil is formed and its relationship to farming and food, and how trees survive and thrive in the wild and what it does for the planet. That's been my passion, and how that passion impacts human activity, and especially livelihoods of people and communities and jobs and work and homes, joinery. That's been where I've earned income in many, many different capacities, because my real passion is about the process and the intelligent ways that we work and live with trees and plants and natural world, and microorganisms. And our relationship with those things is what provides the wealth and livelihoods.
I see. So, throughout your career, I would say you started working before I was born. Have you seen any major changes in the way how the wood or the lumber industry has changed?
The easiest answer is yes, of course. The first thing is, albeit it was true when I was small, the places where most of the woods we see used in our urban worlds doesn't come from what most people kind of imagine when we think wood comes from trees and trees come from forests, or the kinds of forests in which lumber is produced, and even wood used in campfires. Most of that comes from what is best called plantation forests. So they're not natural places where we go in and we see animals occasionally. And I mean, there are animals in the forests we see that are actually plantation forests, but the entire behavior is different. And the reason why the behavior is different is because the composition of those forests are inherently different. Plantation forests are plantation forests because the wood that we generally use is straight, is at least a certain width, but isn't massive. And the reason why it is that way is because it's just so much easier to manipulate in formulated, formula-based construction, and it's almost all generally prefabricated before it's used on the construction sites we see, including furniture. So the wood has to come from the plantation, but forests, to where we use them. And what is done is the easiest way to get them into the programmed sizes, like 8 by 10 or a 4 by 6 or a 2 by 4, we make trees that aren't massive, and we make the wood out of what is there. We create trees that are as straight and as sufficiently long, but they don't have to be a quarter mile up in the air like a sequoia redwood would be a pain to cut down to make into lumber. So we make woods that are around this thick,
Mm-hmm.
yay tall.
Mm-hmm.
And that is cut and made into the things that make it easy. So they're younger,
Mm-hmm.
they're straighter,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have as deep roots,
Mm-hmm.
and there's many, many other factors. But the biggest one is the trees that can be clumped closer together are obviously going to be straight and somewhat tall, but not really, 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 really tall, and not really, really thick. And what you end up is with forests, plantation forests, that are all perennials. Okay? Trees can be easily divided into two types, perennials and annuals. Perennials are generally what we think of as evergreens. Evergreens don't have leaves. They don't shed leaves. They have needles, they have kind of like leafy, clumpy things like spruces and poplars,
Mm-hmm.
but they stay green all year round.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're straight and narrow and reasonably tall and don't shed leaves and are clumped close together, there is no growth that is annual. Annuals tend to be wider, tend to be shaped weirdly, and have these big flat leaves that accumulate the sunlight and do photosynthesis and convert it to sugars, to carbohydrates that it then puts into the soil. So that the microorganisms that need, that can't do photosynthesis, they get food from the plants that shed leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And then the leaves fall every year,
Mm-hmm.
and that decomposes and becomes soil.
Mm-hmm.
So plantation forests are not breeding grounds for new soil because there's nothing to decompose and become soil.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have are two kinds of forests. Forests that are diverse, produce soil, provide an environment for microorganisms, and therefore all of the organisms that form on top because they feed.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have forests that don't have any of that. They just make trees for making stuff.
So all forests are not created equal.
They're not. They're two completely different, entirely different things.
Is one better than the other?
I would say yes. There are reasons for which plantation forests are raised to be that way, because we use the wood in certain ways, which provide for benefits that we believe are essential for how we do things now, and have for 50, 70, 100, 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. But none of those forests produce any soil. None of those produce the kinds of organisms that feed off of each other and grow and provide food in the direct sense, nor does it change and slow down the flow of water from the mountaintops to the sea, because there is no topsoil to absorb the water. There's no organisms to use the water and feed off of the things that require water to grow, that do photosynthesis and shed leaves and give them the environment to live in. So the result is those forests don't contribute really to the nutrition, water needs, and environmental, it's partially security, but the environmental standards which have enabled humans to thrive for thousands of years, millennia. What we have now are forests that are good for making plank wood to use in tract homes.
We can dig into that. How our built environment has changed or evolved together with the lumber industry.
Yes.
I mean, many people would have some idea how modernism or the 20th century architecture really took a leap from more traditional architecture, mostly out of stone and wood, into what is built with concrete and steel. That must have had a huge impact on the lumber industry.
Yes. And one thing that is clear to anybody who really doesn't really need to study, but you look at older architecture, pre-industrial architecture, anywhere in the world, including especially where we are in Japan, you'll see a fairly large proliferation of not very straight pieces of wood, right? A part of that is the not very straight pieces of wood were cheaper. That's the easiest way to put it. They're cheaper than what would have been much easier to manipulate woods that were straighter, right?
Wow, that suddenly shed a light on something that I have always wondered. These crooked beams in old Japanese houses, I thought they were so beautiful, but then I actually do not recall seeing these crooked woods in palaces, Japanese palaces, or grand buildings, even temples. So they were used in commoners' home because they were cheaper. The long straight wood would be bought by the palaces and the temples. Was that how it goes?
It's mostly yes, but partially no. Okay, there is an aesthetic that was, I wouldn't say developed, but developed out of the reason why they were used in the first place. You wanted to use as many of the trees that you cut down if possible, and you would use them in ways that are more suited to what those shapes were easily used for. So you wouldn't use a really crookedy thing in a pillar, right? Doesn't make that much sense. It's not very well balanced. It's hard to use. But in a beam, a big thick piece of gnarly stuff might be used fairly well if that contributed to a structural rigidity, strength, a strength that would support what else came with the building.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was necessary and enabled you to utilize the pieces that were otherwise more difficult to use, then the idea that, oh wow, this kind of crazy curved and seemingly unbalanced thing actually balances quite well and is very good in disseminating the energy in earthquakes, became gradually cool, right? So there were lots of instances in which someone said, yeah, I want to utilize these pieces that are so awkward and ill-conceived that everyone would go, whoa, yo, Samurai Joe, your house has these crazy pieces and it still is up after 180 years. That's kind of cool, right?
Wow, this is super interesting. I mean, what would have been considered a low quality, not beautiful wood through the works of careful observation, application, and craftsmanship would then be turned into something that is appreciated and even inspiring, the way you were putting it. I mean, that attitude is so encouraging, because I find that in the world of materials today, not just wood, but all materials, it's very common to say, oh, this is a good material, this is a bad material. And even in the food industry, right, we can see that ugly shaped orange would simply be discarded because it will not sell. But in the tradition, construction on building art of Japan, they have turned what was considered poor into something artistic and desirable.
It's actually a combination of art and science, even though it probably wouldn't have been called neither art nor science back then. The art aspect of it, you've referred to close enough to perfect that I won't extrapolate further. The science part of it is... here's a good example. You take a 180-year-old house, and it's sitting on these foundation stones. Let's just go with a simple example of a single room, 4 pillar, 6 pillar structure. Okay, so you have four main wall holding posts, and then you have 2 foundation, the daikoku bashira, the 2 main posts,
Yep.
and then the primary beam in the middle,
Yep.
holding up the roof. Okay. It's been around for 180 years, so it's survived 3 major earthquakes that leveled big parts of Tokyo. Because you're doing some refurbishing, the Tokyo government says you must reinforce the structure with diagonal reinforcement beams. Put it through the same earthquake, and it will fall down. Why does the one without the beams not fall, and the one with the beams fall? It's too rigid. It isn't able to absorb the twisting. The walls of a old Japanese home crumble. The tile roofs, everything falls. And the relationship between the beams and the posts and all the other main, they're like tendons, okay? The tendons twist a little bit, you feel a kind of a sprain, and the walls crumble, dissipating the energy. The kinetic energy dissipates with those things that are reusable. It's just really dirt and grass. But the structure is actually not straight anymore. But that's okay, because the floor is also reusable. So everything that looks like the building is actually reusable, and the structure might be tilted a little bit and then the next earthquake is going to twist back and be tilted differently. But every time you're changing the floors and the walls and you're balancing it again on slightly angled differently posts and beams.
And now here, when you use the word reusable, I think about the tile roof and the earth wall and the grass woven tatami. I see that they are not only, to double click into the word reusable, they really are biodegradable, all of them. They are affordable. They are all from rather common materials.
Yeah, they're labor intensive, but yes, affordable in that the materials aren't excessive.
And rare materials,
yes.
rare ingredients and
Yes.
all. And then finally, they're all modular. The fact that they're all modular, both tile, tatami, and even earth in a very, very fine granular level, allows them to be super flexible. Even when the wall is slightly curved, you can still fill it up nicely. Even the roof, the beam is slightly tilted, they can still do it. So a lot of what we consider it to be high-tech concepts in how we design technology to be modular, to be component-based, all that, it already has been embedded in the traditional architecture.
That's right. And the joinery you referred to in the most traditional forms uses no nails and braces. It's just the wood cut into forms that, this is a simple way of seeing them, but it's actually in 3 dimensions. So it's this plus 4 things plugged into holes. And what happens is wood starts out, no matter how much you dry the wood, okay? The first thing is you dry the wood for a certain period of time. Let's say 2 years. Dry it for 2 years, and it bends a little bit, so you know what it's shaped like. Then you make it into a pillar, and then you join it. Actually, for about 10 years. A pine will seep the pine tar for 10, 15 years. People say in Japan it's still alive then. It's not really alive, but it's still interacting with nature and becoming a petrified thing. Until that point, there's a little bit of give and take that it has with what is around it. So the wood that it's been intertwined with, they both kind of like do this and it becomes stronger. It's like a bone that's been broken. It becomes stronger than the bone that wasn't broken. The broken parts are sealed, so the joinery seals it in such a way that the joinery is stronger than the straight parts.
So, in simple terms, if you have 2 wooden sticks using a sophisticated Japanese joinery method to combine them, and you hit it, it would not break at a joint. You would break in the middle of a...
Exactly.
Wow.
And that is probably very, very difficult to break. So what ends up is it's moving around and changing position because it's sitting on a stone and not deeply embedded. So it moves entirely. It twists a little bit. It's dancing.
If you're listening, you might not see it, but Mike is literally dancing just now.
Old Japanese construction allows the building to dance to the ebb and flow of time, earthquakes, typhoons, over centuries, and the walls, the clothing on it changes.
This is great. We knew we would get into the topic of... We wanted to weave together many aspects of Mike's life and the current context where we're in about Japan through this topic of wood. And I think this is a good point where we wrap up the first session. Finally, we should pour you some tea. I think it's enough talking. And some tea. And with that, let's take a quick break and then we'll be back for more. We're on architecture and wood. Next, we'll talk about history and wood.
Okay.
So you want to stick with samurai and wood?
Sure.
All right. So next up, we'll be talking about samurai and wood. Okay. So we're back. Another session of fun chat. So with us is Michael, expert in environmental science, environmental scientist he is, and today we're traveling down this journey about wood and touching upon all the different aspects of modern life or humanity in general, how wood has really shaped our lives.
Yes.
The previous episode we were talking about architecture, wood and architecture.
Yes.
And now we'll get into another popular topic, wood and samurai.
Okay.
All right. Samurai swords are made of metal. So I we talk about the shoes of samurai or what? How does wood have to do with samurai?
Okay, the relationship between wood and samurai is on many, many different levels, of course. Of course, there are parts of a samurai's armor and things that are wood, including what is still used in kendo. It's actually, with kendo, it's bamboo now, but would train with wood before they use the swords. But samurai, the most kind of extreme example of it is a samurai warrior by the name of Date Masamune. He's one of my favorite samurai who lived and fought whatever in the 17th century at the tail end of the Sengoku or the Warring States period. Anyway, he ended up being kind of was a contemporary of people like Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Nobunaga, the tail end of Nobunaga, just before he was killed, and Ieyasu. And he was kind of a feared samurai in the northern, in Tohoku, and especially Sendai. Well, when the Sendai castle was built for Date Masamune, the first thing that was built in the home was the roots of what is called Sendai Kagu, so Sendai furniture. So Sendai Kagu is a type of furniture making in which the wood is cut. There's a little bit of ornateness on the fittings, but the layers of urushi, the Japanese lacquerware, lacquer and polishing is layered and finished 31 times, is how the saying goes, but it's 31 times, 31 different processes until it's finished. So this kagu, this piece of furniture, is at the center of the home, the castle. It was completed first. And it's around this piece of furniture that the castle is constructed.
No
because the furniture is where the samurai, Date Masamune's swords and armor and the pieces, that is the next most important thing to the person in his life. His life is the most important. The second is his armor, all of the gear he needs to be a warlord. So the piece of furniture that houses all of his gear is the most important thing. The castle is secondary to his gear. He's first, the gear is second, then the way in which the construction to protect him from attack and the army to support him. So the castle is constructed on this hill. It didn't come first. So wood is central to how a samurai functions. It's a part of the core. There's many other ways, because obviously wood is used in the construction. So where does the wood come from? Who manages the forest in which we are using 100-year-old trees, 150-year-old trees, 200-year-old trees, 300-year-old trees, depending on where and how it's used. Well, how does a 300-year-old tree become grown in such a way that it can be used in the specialized ways that 300-year-old trees that are more knotty, that are kind of deformed, have a bit of straight and fat parts, how is that used differently from the straight and relatively easily to carry 20 kilometers to the place that it's going to be used in? Well, it's got to be grown at least 300 years and at least 250 years and at least 100 years. Well, did every tree that was grown there 180 years ago, 250 years ago, 300 years, did every tree get used? No. Some got some tree influenza and died. Some survived it but became blemished. So for every tree that was used in the 180-year context, the 250 years context, was one of 20 trees, 50 trees, 100 trees that 99 of them lost. They died.
One out of every 100. I mean, is it a roughly right order of magnitude, or it's just a metaphor?
Partly both. I mean, the knotty, difficult trees, you're more likely to be able to use all or most of them in 350 years, but you're not going to use very many of them. And the way in which they grow, not just the age itself, but the way in which they grow, you can't grow as many of them, and you don't need to grow as many of them.
Right.
But the likelihood of success when you can use them is different. I mean, it's high likelihood of success because it's used in ways that aren't like, we need 10 of these. We only need one of these, and even if it's like this as opposed to this, we can still use it.
I mean, yeah, I guess a 350 years tree was not it's part of the goal, but then they would have, okay, this is good enough at 250 or 180, or we'll just harvest it.
Some of that's true, but most of it is the types of trees that are used in the 350, 500 year context are generally going to be different types of trees because they're knottier trees that are more bent, that are generally harder woods, that are used in specific ways that are different. But no matter how much what you're using, you're making more of them so that the ones that survive can be used.
Right.
You're caring for it across generations. So how did all of that happen? It's not like some guy said, I'm starting a forest, we're going to do this, you're going to do that. Because everyone he talked to died in 60 years, just like him. Okay? So just like a 500-year-old bonsai now that was started by some famous guy his name is on the plaque, somebody planned for this area to be used and maintained properly so that in future generations it will be used in meaningful ways. So the people who did that is not a single person, but the people who did that were actually a type of samurai. I say a type of samurai because they're all really samurai, but these mountain samurai are a little bit different. They're samurai who are more like what we think of now as ninja. Okay? We think of ninja as these sneaky guys that, that climb into the rafters of castles and assassinate people, right? Yeah, they could do that if you hired them to do that. But they're generally people who are, in some sense, could be sneaky, but they lived in the mountains. You could think of them in a different way as mountain ascetics, priests, holy men. You can also think of them as bandits. But they cared for the forest, they cared for the trees, they cared for the kami, the gods that resided in the forest. And they would occasionally get hired by warlords because they're smart people, creative, and have sneaky solutions for things. And they'd go, okay, this warlord wants to build a castle here. And this one, this guy's an asshole. Oh, sorry. But, I mean,
okay.
This one's...
Mostly for adults.
Got good deeds on his... That's what he's doing. So they go, okay, we will trade with you. We will offer you the fruits of our endeavors for the past 18 generations. You, on the other hand, go your own.
That's how the ninjas or the mountain samurais operated?
I'm exaggerating and making it kind of...
dramatic.
yeah. But really, that's what they did. And, in fact, they would need things from the cities, so it's like, we'll trade, this guy, and they'd find out things. It's like, this guy wants to build a house, this one wants to build a temple, this one, and go and do small errands and things, and these guys, they're greedy, they want to do these things. Maybe we can intimate that these guys are wealthy, and you really need to go get it from them. That sounds good. So we'll go through this mountain pass and kill off these guys. And then they just kind of go, smart place. Dumbass, let's just ambush them. They became very skilled at managing the communities so that the communities with the best behaviors and the best practices tend to be rewarded in more beneficial ways.
I mean, they would act as the community police, it sounds like. They also acted as wealth redistributors. They also acted as...
holy men.
Wow. I have to say, I had a different knowledge or information about ninjas. I thought they were extremely loyal to a particular warlord, that they were raised and brought up to be brainwashed that their lives only exist for the prosperity of the warlord, that they would go become assassins, risking their lives for every mission that they go on.
Okay, all landed samurai are, in a sense, exactly what you described. They are fixed to a lord, and are willing to commit harakiri when something goes wrong.
Yes.
Okay, and ninjas, in one respect, one style, could be specialized special forces for a particular warlord. There are instances where that was the case. But the Yamabushi, the practitioners of Shugendo, Shugendo is the religion that existed prior to the Shinto Buddhist divide. And the Japan is filled with mountains, some of which are called Nani Nani Yama, and some are called like Fujisan or Hiko-san or san yamas, san zuke, things, mountains that have san are occupied by a deity, have a kami, and that is why, and often have a shrine on top or at the base and on top, or and the roots generally are precede the introduction of Buddhism to Japan. And the Yamabushi, the Shugendo people who maintain the shrines and or whatever you want to call them, the holy places and the mountains in which that are sanzuke, most of which, if you look, are either prominent things close to metropolitan areas that you can feel like, oh yeah, that's kind of where you'd think a holy place would be, or they're the most rugged things in between places. It's like, why is this place a san? It's the hardest to get place in between here and here, and it was managed and protected by somebody. The Yamabushi, the Shugendo priest ascetics who stand under waterfalls and for 24 hours breathing very little and come out alive, that's the descendants of them. And when you look back into the past, in a sense, objectively, it is impossible to distinguish those people from samurai and from ninja. They were capable of being assassins, and they would get hired by somebody who was paying above market prices to fight in a battle, and if it's two sides that they don't really care about, it's good money, it's like, these past couple of years we've been kind of starving, let's go work for them. That's why they earn some money, and then they earn some money selling some of the trees.
So you're saying just like the Yama, just like the sun. Okay.
Yeah.
Yama and san are written the same ways in kanji, in Japanese, but then apparently with the two pronunciation, it signifies the sun has a god and the Yama has no god. Okay, the sun are more important mountains, now we know, but you're using that as almost a parallel to the samurais. Some samurais are born in the middle of a city with a clear association with the Lord, whereas some are the far and remote sans in between, where they would be almost neutral, and when a particular Lord offers good compensation, they would fight for it. Those are the two types of samurais, just like the two types of sans.
The ronin, the wandering samurai, are really... There were people who disassociated from a ruler and were roaming, but the Yamabushi, the roaming samurai in the mountains, are a part of the ronin unaffiliated samurai class, and were holy men. Yes, exactly.
Wow. And then they, while they're not fighting, manage the forest.
Yes.
And they grow 300 years straight. That concept alone is also worth thinking about. I mean, back in the days, people would give birth at around age 20, maybe 16, latest 25. So each generation is, let's say, 20 years apart. 300 years, that's 15 generations. They would spend 15 years. Like, I tell my grandson, you keep growing this tree, someday we will sell this tree to a good lord.
Yes.
That's what happened.
Yes.
15 generations.
Yes. And one of the reasons why I like pottery so much is the wood-fired kilns followed along the paths of relatively not destroyed but relatively used up forests that were used for construction, used and kind of followed along the same path that the roaming samurai did, and moved the kiln to where there's more excess parts of woods that aren't used in so as the forest is grown and replanted and moved, the kilns would follow, right? And because the kilns are using wood that can't be used for those things, and there's an abundance when they are being used and not so much when those are being regrown. And so the pottery kilns, 15 generations, 16, 20 generations, are using the woods in a different manner to make ash, to make the pots and the dogu, the tools and the utensils, but to make the ash that is used in the, mixed with the soil, just like making clay, and used in the walls to prevent the mold from accumulating. It has ash that's burned, just like the tea ceremony ash is used in the walls themselves.
And then
to prevent decay.
Are these pottery makers also samurai?
No.
No.
They're artisans. They're a separate. There's the samurai classes. There's the. They're closely related to the farming and they're useful people. The traders are just making money off of other people.
That's what I've learned that.
But the wood-fired kiln style potters are following a path that correlates with the Yamabushi. So there's quite a few long running kilns or kiln areas that are deeply connected with Sanzuke Mountains and the Shugendo, the Yamabushi that were inhabiting the area before. There's a few long, like 14th generation, 16th generation heirs that when you talk to the proprietor, the knowledgeable proprietors, they'll say, yeah, we're closely associated with this clan 14 generations ago. Yeah, you're right. We interacted with them a lot, apparently.
I mean, this is not just an amazing fact that people have such a lasting family tradition. But for the person to imagine that, okay, this endeavor that we're about to take will last for 15 generations. My grandson will continue what I'm starting to do right now.
They may not have in the same sense you're describing now, but they know that it must be beyond me, my son, my grandson. They know that because they have seen the works of Master Bonsai or temples that burn down. And they're saying, what I need to do because of what I'm caring for now is something that goes beyond the generations I can see. And if they do it with the same level of integrity and pride that I was taught to do, but more importantly, believed and know now, then at some point, some kind of masterpiece will result. I must trust those who come after.
I hear with both admiration and grave concern, thinking realistically about the state of the world and the timescale that we're talking about. I'm not confident to say that we're still around 15 generations from now at the rate of how we are destroying the environment around us.
Surprisingly, I don't think they were confident either, right? The kinds of, we talk about the worst of pandemics the last several years, and the world's population decreased by just slightly less than 1%, right? In, I can't remember the exact year, but 1870 something, it's actually a little bit before then, but probably 1860. The world was hit with a cholera epidemic. Do you want to take a guess at what percentage of the world's population were devastated but killed by the cholera epidemic?
I'm not sure if this is 1870s you're talking about? 90%.
No.
No, not the world population, but community-wise. I know of severe pandemic in a close community can go upwards to 90%.
The world's population decreased by, roughly speaking, about 10%.
Okay.
10% of the world's population.
And that would have wiped out multiple communities straight off, right?
And how many days do you think at that time, with the way of medicine, how many days between a healthy person you saw and they died?
The deadliest of diseases kills people in 3 to 7 days, but if it's too deadly, it doesn't spread fast enough to reach a large population. So for it to actually impact 10% of the population, I would say somewhere around 30 days.
It's actually much shorter. You're right. The incubation period, there's lots of things, but when people would see people who appeared healthy and well, and within 3 days they were dead. So even though the incubation and when they actually were infected was much earlier, what they would see is a healthy person dead in 3 days. And wiping out 10, 20%, 30%, 50% of the population in the communities that were affected. So oceanside, where ports are. So you live in that period of time and you see things like that happen, you think even more that the world will end within my generation.
That's a great perspective.
That's the perspective that people back then, with the level of health, the level of well-being, the way information traveled. Now, one of the cool things about Japan, it was called the way the news travel was called the ekiden. So just like the New Year's ekiden, the passing the kairanban, which is the board that gets passed around a community to inform of events and things. That was actually a bulletin board. The bulletin boards that were put up in communities all across Japan, which is dependent on a good percentage of the people being literate. In 1863, when Admiral Perry's black ships arrived, how long did the information take to come from Shimoda in Izu, near here, and Edo to Kyushu, the furthest way? How many days do you think it took?
I don't want to guess anymore. 7 days.
Good. 10 days. 10 days for things to cross Japan and become everybody knows. The way information traveled was exactly the same speed as cholera traveled.
I mean, Wood and Samurai, I do want to, with this, we're really getting into the
historical part,
the realm of sustainability, of civilization. And we would still do one more episode where in the next part we will be talking about wood and energy.
Okay.
but I do that thought about planning. I mean, not planning, but expecting things to go for 15 generations and have that faith and commitment to do something. We can't even believe that the things will be the same after the next presidency of 4 years. I cannot believe that the plants will still be alive if I leave it to the care of my son in a week. So that's the state we're in right now.
It is. I mean, I've spoken a bit here and there about my own personal perspectives, but also how I choose to live. And I choose to live in a manner that is first off intelligent, meaning I try to nurture the silos of knowledge in a deep way so that I know some things well.
The anchors.
Then I try to do that not in some random haphazard way, but have sufficient interest and curiosity and endeavor that I understand this well. I understand this fairly well. I understand this completely well. At least to the extent that through time we have acquired this body of knowledge. And then I can make associations and some assumptions and some determinations and get a general sense of some parts of this. So it's no longer a very, very gray places in between, but I have enough black dots and some splotches that the whole area becomes more familiar and understandable, and I can communicate and convey some sense of understanding to other people. That's intelligence. But intelligence is only really useful, beneficial, positive when it is usable and becomes something that helps in the process of others acquiring a similar depth of perception and understanding, but must be guided by a sense of not just the faith that something will happen in a positive way, that should exist, but really the kindness and the compassion to allow for communities of people to reap the benefits of a knowledge that I have not just accumulated myself, but provided as a small snippet of wisdom for others to benefit from. So when I take the data that I become familiar with, the information that I'm able to assess from the bits of data that I acquire, and know that some of these things happen at certain instances or certain conditions and it create that. But when we engage in behaviors that are kind, compassionate, and allow communities to also feel a sense of kindness and compassionate for each other and for the natural worlds that envelop what we think of as good and fruitful, then we behave wisely.
That the purpose of intelligence is to breed more kindness and compassion.
it is not always the purpose. It can be used in other ways, but only when we use intelligence to elicit behaviors that are kind and compassionate and beneficial for inclusive communities, then we are exhibiting what I believe is wisdom.
The elegant equations make things simple, so I'm trying to really take it in a way that I can carry away and remember and apply. That intelligence only becomes wisdom when it's applied
with compassion and kindness.
That's great. And let's use that to wrap up Wood and Samurai. And we'll be back for more from Mike Kato.
It sounds more religious in one context, and it sounds more kind of functionalist in another, but they're really coming from the same. It's not really ideology. It's observing the same things.
So we couldn't help but already started. I mean, when we talk about energy, we can talk about it from a functional perspective about, powering lights and engines
Yep.
and society. You can also talk about it in a very metaphysical way about what God and
Yep.
all this different, they often refer to energy
Yes.
in the air. So where should we start, Mike?
Well, okay. The kinds of things we think of mostly as energy now, like things that power our cars, things that recharge our cell phones, we're really ultimately saying is we need things to move and things to allow us access to systems. Okay. Both can kinetic energy and electrical whatever impulses. Both can be powered through maybe not infinite, but many different ways, right? And of all of the kinds of ways that we can power things, we've relied upon one that is really, how should I put it, the production does something in a chemical way that is quite dramatic, and that's burning fossil fuels. Right? The fossil fuels come from dead biological matter that has decayed and for millions of years. We pump it out, burn it. So the carbon that is in the fuels is released. That's all we're really talking about. So it's how fast are we releasing underground carbon, and in several million years, there's many reasons why the carbon will combine with other things other than just the oxygen to make CO2. But oxidation, it's actually free oxygen is combining with the carbon that is freely
released from the process of burning.
Yeah. And so it's being oxidized, and so we have the phenomenon we're experiencing now. And it will take a very long time for the carbon to dissociate from the oxygen and then get restored in other things.
It takes a lot of trees.
Takes a lot of trees. It takes a lot of things. There's a lot of things that it could be that could be done to do that, including the
Ocean.
yeah, submerging and a bunch of things. But the easiest way, we are carbon-based life forms.
Yes.
Right? Your dog is, the fishes are, the plants are, everything we know of right now as life forms. There's actually a few that aren't, but
Nitrogen based.
there's nitrogen-based ones, but there's a few things that exist on our planet in abundant numbers that aren't carbon-based life forms, but let's leave that aside for a second. And life forms bind the carbon in different combinations that remove them permanently from being free and in carbon dioxide form. It's because the trees and plants breathe carbon dioxide instead of oxygen, right? The easiest way of describing what those forms are is carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates are carbon with hydrogen. These is understood, it's hydrogen, but it's a complex of things. But so carbon and hydrogen coming from water, H2O, is what forms carbohydrates, what we think of as sugars, right? It uses photosynthesis to take the carbon dioxide, breathe that in, combine it with water, make sugars, and release the oxygen for us to breathe. That's what plants do. Plants are a chemical factory for absorbing light energy, taking out the carbon dioxide, and making sugars. Those sugars are the composition things that make the plant material, but it also provides nutrients to a whole wide range of microorganisms and other biological forms that are not carbon life forms. They don't breathe oxygen, they don't breathe carbon dioxide, they're not plants or animals. They are what we think of as fungi and bacteria and those kinds of things. They're not carbon-based life forms. They are critical for composting things. They're critical for breaking down the minerals in rock formations. And they thrive off of the sugars that the plants provide them, especially the trees. So what trees are the factory that is enabled carbon dioxide, carbon that is in the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, and putting it into places that can be reutilized by everything else that is alive. So the short answer in terms of why are trees essential is they are the perfect processing factory for changing the excess of carbon dioxide in our environment and then making them into forms that can be utilized in ways that maybe don't make oil again for many, many, many millennia, but at least put it into places for other things to consume. It's the least, it's not just trees, obviously, algae and many other plant-based forms that do photosynthesis help in the same process. But planting trees is the most effective method of dealing with the climate issues that we have created through fossil for food burning.
So how well is the carbon trading industry affecting or slowing down deforestation or increasing forest planting right now?
That's you can see pluses and minuses, and I think in total it doesn't really do that much in either way.
Wow.
And the reason is
a lot of people became quite rich with it.
yes, and the reason is because carbon trading depends on the amount of carbon being sunk, isn't the best term, but is being invested in other biology, right? So some things like planting trees or making certain kinds of algae put more carbon into biology. So some people in some countries, in some places, in some companies are doing that more than anything else. So that's the net positive in carbon, right? Carbon invested into things, biology.
Mm-hmm.
The trading is based upon that positive. All the stuff that I'm doing badly, burning shit, well, burning fossil fuels to do shitty things. I can subtract my minuses with your pluses and we come out zero. Well, no, you're both doing what you did before, good things and bad things, and saying that we're coming out zero, which is better than minus. You're really just saying it in a different way. We still have to do more better things than the worst things, and no matter how much the trading comes out zero, unless we are actually putting more biology into process, all of that trading part, the exchange part, fine, go ahead. If it can help you to see how much differences are happening, it's better than nothing in a sense, because it is just rethinking what you're doing.
Right. I mean, I'm not in the industry. I try to educate myself about it, and there's so many information on the internet today. It's just hard to know what is actually happening. I have, and I also know once I'm exposed to one thing, if I spend 30 seconds or 15 minutes reading an article, the algorithm will start feeding me more of that kind of article. It's impossible to know. But I want to ask you, I mean, person to person, no algorithm in between, hopefully, how well is this industry doing? I got the sense that there's so much of this trading. Yes, one person do the pollution, one person do the recapturing, it balances out. But there is so much exaggeration on the capturing, and there's so much motivation to exaggerate such that the traders can make more money out of this trade.
Yes.
Then it's actually a net negative.
Yes, I agree. But I don't discount that most of the endeavors on the positive side are endeavors to increase biology. Of course, not all biology is created equally, meaning certain kinds of biological matter more than others. That's not to say that President Biden is better than Trump. Trump is worse biology. That's not my intention. What I mean by that is certain kinds of growth or certain kinds of environments in which growth proliferates are better than others. And the most easy way of understanding it is the more biodiversity that exists in a ecosystem, you're better off than fewer
Diversity.
The opposite of biodiversity.
Monotony? Homogeneity.
Homogeneity. That's it. That's the term. But when you have, that's why I go back to the plantation forests versus native or biodiverse forest management. The plantation forests tend to be, I don't know, well, no, I do know of plantation forests that are involving trees that are annuals, but the vast majority involve perennials, right? So evergreens.
Back to where we started.
And the reason is because they are straighter and narrow and can be...
Grows faster.
And grows faster and grows better for making lumber, right? Mm-hmm. Back to where we started from. Well, they don't shed leaves. Mm-hmm. They've never shed a leaf in their entire lives. The only time in which they provide decaying matter is when they die. Only time. Very bad to be... Well, it's not only useful when they die. Well, it is, because they're only useful when they die. When they die, they are used as lumber, they're used as firewood, and they're used for forming, for feeding bacterial organisms that feed off of them. Mm-hmm. But when they're alive, they provide very little nutritional value for anything.
Are you bad-mouthing perennials?
Going back to the sequoias, they were my first love.
Okay.
The seeing them in the 2,000-year-old forms made me just mesmerized me at the magnificence of what forests could be. But the best forests are biodiverse and are canopied, multi-canopied, generally at least 3 or 4 different levels of canopy, and involve wide trees and so some of the common annual trees that were common throughout Japan's mountainous areas in many regions include the trees that are most commonly associated with kami in shrines, in old shrines. So you see Zelkova trees, which are Zelkova is kiri, or the ginkgo.
Ginkgo, yes.
They shed leaves. They're considered holy trees. Well, many of the kinds of trees that are considered holy trees are the other trees that inhabited the forest in smaller numbers, but are really critical to the ecosystems in which they were in. And it makes sense. So they were revered as holy trees because even a few of them made a huge difference in the health and welfare of that forest.
I see.
So sakura, walnuts, kurumi, donguri, the chestnuts are the kuri, the donguri are the acorn trees. And there's a wide variety of trees that are now, in a sense, forgotten. And why I said there are plantation forests that have them, a lot of them are grown as decorative trees in small plantations in the lowlands, in the foothills. And the foothills are no longer foothills, they're lowlands by the small mountainous regions. The reason is because the meadows was where the dirt that was used to flatten the flatlands that were bumpy, they weren't as straight as they are now to make roads. So the foothills are flatter than they were back in the day. The rolling meadows aren't very rolling anymore. That's where the decorative trees are grown and the fruit trees are grown. So you do see places where there are plantation annuals, but you don't see them in the forests anymore.
And how do we get here from the energy?
Because what to do about those plantation forests?
Do they? I mean, the fact that most of them don't shed leaves. Is it a bad thing from an energy perspective? Because
no,
they don't. I mean, they just suck up all the suns they can and turn it into building materials.
There is so much of the stuff which is prohibitively expensive to move long distances and is therefore uncompetitive vis-a-vis cheap imported lumber grown in far-off places that can grow it in wider expanses that are forested in mechanically, industrially.
So they're really, now we're getting into two aspects, starting from wooden architecture. Wooden energy, we're talking about the embodied energy of the tree and the transportation, the logistics of the trees.
Right, but the angle that I'm approaching it now is how do we go from plantation forests to more biodiverse forests? Well, the proximity and the density of mountains and forests in the 60-70% forested Japan or mountainous Japan is, despite its seeming, it is proximate, but the cost of bringing down the steep and knotty mountains that Japan is. Japan isn't like wide expanses of Canada or wide expanses in Russia, and China, where lots of the cheap imported lumber have been sourced from over the past 50 years throughout the world, where they are harvested, so they're cut industrially, including now giant drones that cut.
Really?
Yeah. So they can automate and industrialize the entire process. They're not logged like we'll cut this one, and we bring it down the mountain through these dammed rivers that we I mean, Japan, everything, it's not by hand per se, but it's way more labor intensive to do forestry, to make prefabricated the prefabricated lumber process of making stuff. You have to take it all to some port where there's these big huge factories, and then construct these homes that are Lego parts to build quickly, right? So Japan is made so that you can bring it down and build the kominka down the hill. So it's really expensive. So what's a substitute? What is a substitute? It's let's make some of those things, and then we can't like have a wood-fired kiln by every forestry site as it might have been.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can, but it's not enough. But what we can do is make small, it doesn't have to be biomass, but plants that process the wood that isn't used in lumber, that is more kind of, how should I put it, designed construction, and make energy in order that we supply local needs, community-based needs, as well as some access to the most neighboring metropolitan, the cities.
Mm-hmm.
And as we do that, replant the forests with biodiversity and adventure, and that is, I think, a 30-year, 50-year scenario that can wean local communities gradually away from fossil fuels.
There's many layers of aspirations and visioning and challenges in what you just described. But this is what really brought us into this conversation in the first place. How do we turn underutilized forests into productive tourism?
Yes.
That people are not just traveling and take pictures for Instagram, and they would actually go and learn about the forest, have a mobile infrastructure that allow them to process those wood into something that would be of value to themselves or the local community. Even working, not even, but most likely working together with the local community to create a synergistic ecosystem, namely circular economy.
Yes.
That's why we're talking about a potential vision of creating a mobile FUUUN studio.
Yes.
That would process wood anywhere it goes. I mean, that plantation, that homogeneity and extreme efficiency is what made our life today possible. I would say Fordism allowed, cars first to brought down 1/10 of the price, and people could start affording cars and living in bigger houses. It was we call it the American dream, and that inspired the whole world to follow. Now we're saying, okay, all of this hyper efficiency and homogeneity is not leading us. Is how would I say? Is costing us the diversity that really is a better option. So we're now finding a way out of the achievement that we have made to ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, there's one side of it that is positive achievement, and there's another side that is more treacherous. Yeah. I agree. And wood and lumber and plantation forests has been a positive, not from a value perspective, but as a huge impetus towards those gains that most contemporary people think of as positives. I agree. Now, on the other hand, I think that whether or not we think of it as apocalyptical or not, we do understand that lots of carbon in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and rising temperatures, primarily looking at the ocean temperatures, are affecting a wide variety of things, of which the most undisputed part of it is there's a lot more evaporation, so airborne water. I mean, there's more water in the air. And the more water in the air results in heavier and more sudden rainfall in different places. So we're experiencing superstorms. Discounting all the other parts of, what some people would call climate change and other things, we are seeing a higher incidence of superstorms that have lots more water over shorter periods of time. Now, that is caused partially by, but more importantly, the plantation forests and the lack of new soil produced in those forests. The lack of topsoil means that the water rushes down from the superstorms at the tops of the mountains faster down the hills. I mean, that's undisputable. There's no soil for it to seep into. So we see landslides and dams and roads and concrete barricades sliding down in instances. Whether we attribute that to the cause being climate matters, there's evidence that's happening, and part of that evidence is can be attributed to older infrastructure, which some people will say just needs to be replaced for it to be as effective as it was before, but they are sliding. What we also know is that the forests that are more biodiverse don't slide as much. Of course, there's fewer dams and roads and concrete barricades in those places because the conditions that resulted in continued or recreated biodiversity meant that there were fewer people there and fewer settlements and fewer construction projects and fewer reasons for those barricades and dams to exist. But we can see that evidence that the biodiversity even if you dispute whether it's a cause or correlation, we can see a correlation between biodiversity and fewer disasters, right? So then the primary kind of influential wisdom is or knowledge is whether trying to understand whether it's cause or correlation, right? And of course, it's the people who believe there is a correlation who are doing more studies about those differences than the people who don't believe it's just correlation, it's not a cause, right? The people who believe there's it's just a correlation, it's just a random fact that the places that weren't plantation remade as plantations, they're just lucky, right? But the people who believe that the plantation forests are and the lack of topsoil is a very direct reason for the slides to occur in those places more are going, no, these are the mechanisms in which that happens.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to believe that whether or not you believe in climate change or not, when you study things and see the underlying mechanisms that cause that, the people who believe that there is a causation and not just correlation tend to have studied the matter more. They're more believable than the people who are saying, no, it's just, we're just correlating two things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, I'm trying to behave intelligently based on the knowledge I'm finding through lots of people doing studies, and then trying to do the activities that encourage us to create the environments that are more likely to be disaster resistant, to be resilient, to be comfortable, friendly, and inviting to artists and campers and food foragers and mountain climbing enthusiasts, because the risks of landslides are less, or the heavy rains in those places are absorbed, and we don't see the damage and the destruction. So it's a combination of how can we utilize the forest in ways that it can more quickly be redeveloped with biodiversity in mind. And for me, the wood represents an energy repository as well as other things, building repository and a mechanism to do lots of things, but providing some of our energy resources in less polluting wood burning. Maybe not burning. There are kinds of plants that don't burn it. It's
decomposed?
No, it's not decomposition, but it's disassociate, separating the carbon from the oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
That's in, or the carbon and the hydrogen, the carbohydrates, the cellulose mm-hmm. in the wood, mm-hmm. Without burning it and exposing it to, and recapturing the carbon to do other things. It's more complex than just burning it in a biomass plant, mm-hmm. but it's really the same thing, just done in a slowed down, in a different process. And either way, we're just putting it back for a while, as long as we keep planting.
Mm-hmm. So ultimately, even trees are the best technology to capture carbon to date that we have, but it's just storage. It doesn't really reverse it. We ultimately have to change our lifestyle.
Yes, but the kinds of storage that are in, well, the redwoods being they only exist in certain places on the planet, but then of course there's banyans that also mm-hmm. live mm-hmm. thousands of years too. But in discounting those kinds of trees, mm-hmm. The bioflora, it's not any specific tree, but the combination of flora and fauna that exist in a pristine biodiverse woods is permanent, in the sense of we can destroy them, but just like the Amazon, if we keep the conditions that maintain the greatest biodiversity there, it can continue on for millennia and actually grow as opposed to shrink. If it were a non-permanent, then it should shrink over time because it gets depleted. But instead, what we see is biodiverse microclimate. The more we leave it alone, it spreads. So the net carbon sunk in biology always tends toward growth and not depletion. It's only when humans encumber the process that biology shrinks. Every other biological form actually increases the amount of sunk carbon. We're who fucks it up.
Let nature fix it all.
No, like the Shigendo, the Yamabushi, do the things that in a kind of rogue ninja fashion manipulate nature so that nature wins.
Manipulate nature so that nature wins.
It's not actually manipulating, it is manipulating how human behavior affects the nature so that nature wins. And nature is always on the winning side. That's what
I thought too, right? Nature's always on the winning side. I guess then the interpretation would be live with nature without trying to win nature.
Yes, to defeating nature to allow civilized societies to win is bad.
It's fruitless.
Yeah, it's a losing proposition. So what I propose instead is to manipulate human activity in intelligent ways so that we create an environment in which nature is on the winning side.
I mean, that was frankly a very long survey of how the plantations and natural biologically diverse forests differs, including the debates amongst the experts. But what we could take away is that trying to win nature is a losing proposition.
Yes.
Humans can live much more successfully, humbly accepting that nature has perfected its way to be resilient on its own.
Yeah. The natural competition that is being waged in the natural world is pretty futile to fight against it.
I think we have come to the time where we have to wrap up.
Yes.
But it was a great journey running through all this deep knowledge you have about the world, about
wood,
environmental science, all through this one theme of wood. I mean, it's not a coincidence that basically every civilization's architecture started with wood. So, with that said, I really thank you for your time and this amazing pursuit of deep knowledge in pockets of areas that anchors your orientation in life, and then to slowly expand that into other fields such as community building and tourism and all that. There's a lot of opportunities for us to hopefully work together and make each of our very much aligned philosophy grow even more diverse.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to close with one thing. I'm 61 now. I used to think that most of my life work, that my endeavors were for my children and for children, successive generations, to pass on something of legacy that is positive. As I grow older, especially once I cross the 50 barrier and then into my 60s, I realize that I'm closer to the other end. And I keep thinking about what my ancestors and what people before think of what I am now. And I think about matter and thought and intelligence, and most things can be attributed to some kind of chemical or electrical activities, to something functional, something that is behavioral, something that is chemical and substance oriented. And that includes most thought. But I think there's something that the Japanese word tamashi encapsulates quite well, that is beyond any of that substance. It's something that is different. It's something that makes me unique, you and I unique. And it's not just the beliefs or thoughts, it's something beyond it. It's just the essence of what it means to be a thoughtful human in the world. And I think that somehow has to remain somewhere. It's not cellular, it's something else. And that something cellular is going to know who we are. Beyond cellular, it knows who we are, knows who I am. That's how I know that I exist. And so all the people that came before us, theirs is somewhere too. It's not things. And I want them to look upon me, a Japanese American guy, grandfather, came from a samurai family, poor farmer, went to America on a freight ship and at 14, and then his grandson at 24 came to Japan and from America with an American education. I want him and all of my ancestors back then to say, yeah, that's really weird. The guy who was born in America, he's the last real samurai, the Yamabushi, who lived with a passion for how intelligence can lead to a more kind and just and compassionate world. He's good. So I'm looking forward to what happens, but I'm looking back and hoping that they see my life as being a good one.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
That's it for today.